Hello, this is Hunter McDermott with another episode of Guitar Blog. This is episode 37, I believe. I thought today I would talk a little bit about bebop stuff and what work is, and maybe do some work around that kind of stuff. So what I mean by that is I fall into this trap where I feel like I'm doing work, but I'm not. And then when I am, I feel like I'm not. So, for example, I've got this great book called Talk Jazz Guitar by Ronnie Ben-Hur. I've talked about it before. It's a distillation of, or presentation of a lot of ideas from Barry Harris, with whom Ronnie studied. Barry is a piano player, Ronnie's a guitar player, so it's kind of just taking that material and presenting it specifically for the guitar. And it starts with, here are the half-step rules for major scales, meaning you can take a major scale, and then there are all these different spots where you can, depending on what note you're starting on, where you can add additional notes. So you might take a descending major scale and add this. And now it's sort of, bebop-y, I guess. It's got a jazzier sort of sound to it, because that chromaticism is sort of the hallmark of bebop. Then you can add even more notes. And then if you go to the second note of the scale, there are different rules for that. Let's see if I can even remember. Something like that. Anyway, the point being, it's a ton of information. Like, he presents it as, I think there are 6 rules, and if you consider playing those from every note of this major scale in all 5 positions, it took me weeks, or at least a couple weeks. And the whole time I feel like I'm doing work. Like, I'm sitting down and I'm like, man, for like an hour, half hour, 45 minutes, or an hour, I'm going to just work on these scales. And there's nothing inherently wrong with working on scales. But then what happens is, at the end of it, I don't know how to use any of it. And Ronnie doesn't really give you a whole lot of help in that department. And I find that this is very common among musical instruction books, at least in the jazz world. There's just like presentation of information without a lot of practical examples. Now, the practical examples are not obscured from you. They're just in your ears more than on the page. Like, if you listen to a Cannonball Adderley solo, it's going to have examples of the stuff that's presented to you in the book, and that's your teacher. That's telling you. It's basically like, okay, I heard this solo. I think this is really cool. What is he doing? Now, you could transcribe the solo and just look through it and try to understand what patterns are emerging, and then try to build some practice around that kind of stuff. And that's totally cool and valid. And I think if I were more rigorous with my practicing, and I would be a lot better player, but 2, I would be focused a lot more on tunes, learning tunes, transcribing solos, and trying to mine them for information. But for the rest of us, there's, what are they doing? And then buy a book or get a DVD or take a course or something like that. And they can kind of connect those dots. They can go, here are some cool bebop scales, or scales with half steps rules added, as Barry would say. And then you can go, oh, okay, I'm playing this kind of thing. And that sounds kind of like something I heard Cannonball do. So I sort of know I'm on the right track. But at the end of the day, still, you're playing a scale and Cannonball is playing music, right? So there's like still another step there that's kind of missing. And that's where, in my opinion, the work comes in, which is, now you've got a bunch of information, and now you've got kind of an explanation of that information. under your fingers. Now you need to sit with it and play around with it and really understand it. So it's kind of like you're in grade school where you take a class and you're learning information, and then you go out into the world and find over a much longer period of time, you might study something for one school year and then use that information many years later. And that kind of like connects the dots for you in your brain. You're like, oh, I know this information and I remember learning this information, but I didn't really see the value in it, or I couldn't kind of connect the dots to the practical usage of the stuff until now. And now it all kind of makes sense. So with music, you can, and following that same analogy, you can learn a new vocabulary word and then force it into your vocabulary by using it as often as you can. And then it'll really get stuck in your brain. You can, try to commit things to memory and sort of speed up the process of learning that information, or it can happen more organically over time. The good thing is the organic stuff happens. So when you're working on music, as long as you're practicing something and as long as you're listening, you are progressing in some way. The main way is you're listening. You're getting a lot of information crammed into your head. And as you continue to practice actual technique, learning tunes, whatever, it will be much easier to be creative and to, learn songs or write your own songs or whatever, because you kind of have a big pool in your head of information to draw from. And most of the time that'll happen subconsciously. You just kind of know it. So that's good, but you want to be able to do a little bit better than that. You want to try to accelerate that process by turning things into exercises and really working on them. And that's the work part. Okay. So what I thought I would talk about is how I am trying to transform this information I'm learning into work, which eventually is into music. So the context for this, for today is I am learning and working on a tune called Half Nelson by Miles Davis. So it's a cool tune, and it's I don't know, it's not really strictly considered bebop, but it's got this complicated head. The melody of the tune is long, and it doesn't really repeat itself, and it's got a lot of notes in it, and it's fast, sort of, or medium fast. So it's got some bebop trappings. Some people would consider it bebop, others maybe not, but. So I want to be able to play these sort of chromatic type things over top of this. I want to work on my bebop stuff over the chord changes in this tune, be able to put them all together. That's the tune I'm working on. Specifically, the first 4 bars, which would be C major 7 or C major 6, F minor 7, B dominant 7, and then it goes back to C major 7. So something like let's do this. Something like that. That's an example of what they call a backdoor 2-5. So you're doing a 2-5 progression, F minor 7 being the 2 chord of the key of E flat major, and then B flat 7 is the 5 chord of E flat major, suggesting that the 1 would be E flat major. And indeed it is, but instead of doing that, we start with C major 7, then we do that 2-5, but then we resolve back up to the C major 7. So that's cool. And one of the things I've been picking up from a combination of sources, but specifically Barry Harris as like the top line, this is where this information was sort of codified. Then Ronnie Ben-Hur, who's taken it and moved it onto the guitar. And then I was also doing some stuff by this guy named Kenyon Carter, a course called the Bebop Bootcamp, which I like because it takes a lot of sort of complicated ideas and just sort of it doesn't simplify the ideas, it just reduces the number of options. And I like that. I think that's part of the working process, is going, I don't need to practice all of this stuff. I just need to take something very small and limit my options and just work on it. Because there's so much you can get out of very, very little when it comes to music or creativity. Like, imagine a painter who has 2 colors or 1 color. You know, they could still do so much. It's best to maybe see what you can do with 1 color before you feel like you have to add another one, and then add it only when you know that you're ready and you see a need for it. In this case, we've got this 2/5 progression, and Barry likes to simplify this even further. Instead of considering the 2, which is F minor 7, he considers only the B flat. So it's kind of like, even though it's not played this way, it'll sort of be like thinking of it like this. Something like that. So you just sort of imagine that the F minor 7 is not there. And that's really nice because it's simple, so you don't have to think, okay, what can I play over F minor 7, and then what can I play over B flat major 7? You just think, what can I play over a dominant chord? And then it also happens to make the amount of time that you have to work with twice as long. I'm now not restricted to just 1 measure of a B flat 7. I've got 2 measures. And because it's a dominant chord, Barry thinks of a dominant scale. So, which is a major scale with a flat 7. So instead of, in this case, B flat, instead of in A, he plays an A flat. And then what you do is, imagine you're taking the scale from the root and you're descending. And what's really interesting about bebop is how it's so much more concerned with rhythm than anything else. I don't think about rhythm that much. Rhythm is something that I feel, sort of emulate, sort of subconsciously, but learning bebop has gotten me to think about rhythms more purposefully, I guess. So the general idea is you've got a 7-note scale, and you end up on a root on the and, if you were just to play the notes in order, on the and of 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Which isn't great for a couple of reasons. One, that's sort of got this sense of resolution. It does have a sense of resolution because it's the 1. It's kind of where you're headed. All the notes are headed there. Your ear's wanting to get to that point. And it's sort of weird for it to come on an offbeat because we want kind of things to play through a measure and then end on beat 1 of the next measure. That's just sort of the natural gravity of music. And then additionally, we have the notes of the chord that I'm playing over top of, B flat 7, are all in there. And those are also on offbeats. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So it's taking like the notes that define the sound of the chord most clearly, and it's putting them not on the beats, which are the strong parts of the measure, it's putting on the offbeats. So in order to kind of shift everything over so that we're landing on 1, and we're emphasizing the notes of the chord on the beats, somebody, I don't know, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, certainly wasn't Barry originally, came up with the idea, let's add another note. So we take the dominant chord, dominant 7 scale, and we add one more note, which is the major 7. We put the major 7 back in. All right, now we have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. We've achieved both goals. We have the resolution on the B1 of the next measure, and we have the strong beats, the notes of the chord on the strong beats. All right, so already we have something resembling bebop, and we have something that sounds cool. So let me record. Let's see, I've got a loop already. All right, cool. So this is the 4-chord progression. So just playing like some C major stuff. And then just playing the scale. All right, so you can play with it in a lot of different ways with just that simple idea. The idea being playing over a 2/5, playing just a dominant 7 scale with a major 7 added. Now you already heard a few variations. The simplest way to get new information or new material out of that is to just play the scale starting in a different place. So instead of starting on beat 1, which sounds great, start on beat 2, and that changes the way it sounds. Start on the and of something and see if that gives you something new, some sort of new sound. And then I was throwing like a little, whatever you would call that. I'm sure there's a technical term. Just like a little flourish. And then I was also doing walking up the arpeggio, the B-flat 7 arpeggio at the end. And having that resolve back down to a note, in this case G, which fits into the key of C. Right. So then you can take it up an octave. Same exact notes, same exact idea, except I'm starting up an octave. So with just that one very small thing, I've just got so many options, so much stuff I can play. And that's where, when you get to that point where you have something new, some small concept that's new, to take the time to play with it. And really, when you're practicing the idea, when you're getting it, another thing, you're getting it in your ears, and it's giving you sort of a limited palette with which to be creative, which limitations are almost always the best fuel for creativity. If you don't have a million options, you've only got 1 or 2, then it's easier to conceive of what you can do with that stuff, right? So let's take it one step further. Lots of different ways we can go from here. The things I'm thinking about I got mainly from Kenyon Carter. There's also a really great YouTube channel called Things I Learned from Barry Harris. Another guy who studied with Barry Harris, a guitar player, who just every episode he's presenting some sort of new idea or an example of an idea that he's already talked about, which I really like. I like when people give you an idea and then also show you what to do with it. Something that I don't always do, but I know is extremely valuable to me as a student. All right, so what Kenyon Carter does is he provides you a few different sort of techniques to build off of this. I'll talk about his stuff first, and then we'll talk about the YouTube guy, whose name I can't remember. So one really cool thing that you can do to transform this simple scale walkdown is to approach that root note with an arpeggio. Now you can do the root, you can start from the root. I don't think that's one that you hear all that often, but it works great. More commonly, you might hear an arpeggio starting from the third. And this is really cool. So I'm taking a B flat dominant 7 chord, and I'm thinking the third, which is D, and then using all of the notes that fit into that dominant scale, which means that the chord I end up with is a D minor 7 flat 5. The formula being I'm just starting on the third of the chord and I'm playing thirds. So I'm playing every other note. So skipping over the E flat and going to F. Skipping over G, going to A flat. Skipping over the root, B flat, and going to C. Which is the same formula that I use to play the B flat major or B flat dominant 7 arpeggio. It's just every other note of the chord of the scale. Starting from D. You can start from the F, which is the fifth. Which gives you an F minor 7 chord. We'll come back to that one in a sec. And then starting from the flat 7, which is an A flat, gives you an A flat major 7. So that's really cool. You've got a dominant chord, and sort of built into it, you have a minor 7 flat 5 chord, a minor 7 chord, and a major 7 chord. All of those chords, the notes of all of those chords will sound really nice while that B flat 7 chord is happening. Alright, so let me prove it. So I'll kind of noodle around on C major, and then when I get to the 2-5, F minor 7 to B flat 7, I'll play around with these different arpeggios. So let's do that one again. Anyway, so that's cool. That stuff's kind of built into that chord. That's huge for me. Just sort of seeing all the extra material that's sort of already built into the sound. So then what you can do is take this simple scale run and work your way up to it using arpeggios. So from the root, like we heard earlier, or from the third. Now this has an added benefit of going up past the root and then coming down from the fifth. Alright, so that causes something interesting to happen, because now we are not starting the scale run on the root, because the arpeggio takes us so far past it that when we try to come down, we're not at the root, we're at the third of the B flat dominant 7 scale. So then we could just walk the scale down from there. 3, 2, 1, 7, flat 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. And that works as well because we end up on the third. We'll talk about what to do when we end up not where we want to end up. That's kind of where I'm working on stuff now. But for now, that's cool. And then from the fifth, or from the flat 7, I'm sorry, makes us end up at the 5. Let's see. All right, anyway, so there's a lot of different options you can do there. But that's really cool. So you can walk your way up to various notes of the dominant 7 scale, and then walk your way down the scale. You hear this all the time. Mess that one up. Let's see. All right. So messing around with that idea. And now this starts to get really interesting because now you can do this kind of stuff where you can walk up an arpeggio. And then when you get to it, when you're kind of walking your way down and you get to another scale tone, you can... Sambo? You around, man? See my cat here in a second. You can then take an arpeggio from that chord tone, even if it's in the middle of the phrase. So walking up this minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio from the third, and when I reach the fifth, instead of walking all the way down, I just go up again. Which is really cool. You can do that from different places. So that's starting up from the fifth. And when I get to the flat 7, I go up again. Yeah. So then you can kind of try to play a little exercise like that. Let's see if I can do. And then you can start to see how these little things piece together. If you've ever listened to bebop players, they just seem to be able to rattle off so many notes. And this is the way that they can do a lot of that stuff. One, they're making everything chromatic, or a lot of things chromatic. So, hey buddy, what's up? Need some attention? Hey guy. So that's one technique, is the arpeggios, connecting all these things. You can kind of just loop around forever. And then the only other thing, or the next thing, I think that's really useful, and maybe a good place to stop. You can already get so much information out of just that amount of stuff. But the next place, I think, to get to before you stop and then go do a bunch of work is octave displacement. So this idea is where you are walking down the scale, and when you get to a chord tone, instead of continuing to walk down, so in this case, I'm getting to the 5th, and then instead of going 4, 3, 2, 1 below where you are, like you would do in a normal scale, go up an octave from the next note. So basically, instead of going down to this note, this E flat, jump up to an E flat, and then keep walking down. So then you have something like this. So that's an arpeggio, a scale walk down with octave displacement. And now you're jumping all over the place. Octave displacement makes a lot of sense because, one, it sounds cool. Two, you can kind of reset. Like every instrument's going to have its limitations as far as its range of notes, and especially on a saxophone, any kind of horn, you're going to reach the bottom or top limit of what you can do, and you're going to need to jump down and keep going, or jump up and keep going down. And being able to just effortlessly loop yourself around without really changing the underlying idea. You're just doing a scale run, which isn't that complicated to understand or play, and you're making it more interesting by just jumping up and finishing the scale. Let's see, so you could do that in different places. And you could do it with arpeggios as well. So in this case, I have a D minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio, but instead of starting from the D and going up, I start from this D up above, and I go down, and then up. So it's the same notes, replacing this low D with this high D. That's another idea, it's just octave displacing the arpeggio. Alright, so that was something random. You can start to play around with all kinds of little stuff like that. And that's working really, really well over that 2-5. Any of those ideas will work really nice. So let's play around with that for a sec and hear how that sounds. That's terrible. Let's go. That doesn't work if you keep going. But anyway, So that's the idea. That's some ideas. And the final bit of this, where I'm getting to now, is one, I think that sounds cool, and using it correctly, by which I mean like making it sound good, however that works. There were some times in there where I was really like fiddling around with some ideas, and some just didn't work out at all, or some I was messing with the C scale. And I ended up in a weird place where I wasn't sure what to do. I can follow my ear and just kind of start in on some bebop licks and sort of modify where they go on the fly. Just kind of fooling around. You know, I make mistakes in there, stuff that doesn't sound good, but that's okay, because I'm just kind of messing around and trying to find something that sounds good. So the last part of this, before I need to just sit down and work on this stuff a ton, and really absorb it before I get into any other concept, is something my friend would call off-ramps. So one thing about this material is that it tends to kind of loop itself back to itself. So like this scale run ends up on a B flat, which is the chord that we're playing over. But if we're trying to land on beat 1 of the C major 7 scale, then starting like, for example, I will start the scale once the B flat chord starts. Right, it ends on a B flat, which is not part of the chord that we're going to. The lick sounds really nice when I'm playing it over top of the B flat 7, but when I'm making the transition from a B flat 7 to a C major 7, you can hear the B flat note does not sound good. It's clashing with the chord. So what we can do is start to think, take the same idea, and instead of landing on a note that doesn't work for where we're headed, land on a note that does. Like this B natural maybe, or go down to an A, or figure out how to maybe make it land on a C. The easiest way would be just to move the B flat up to a B, which sounds a little weird in isolation, and is not a strong resolution note landing on the 7, but it will work. So we have the F. Sounds better anyway. One more time. So an alternative to that is you can start to get creative with just thinking about where you're headed and filling up the space in between. So instead of landing on the B, which sounds fine but not that great, instead of playing the C and then walking down to the B, try reversing the two. That sounds great, and it'll sound really, really great over the chord progression, because the root of a C major 7 chord is a C, which is where you're landing. And so you've got this nice bebop sound, and then you've kind of accidentally stumbled on another technique, which is called Enclosure. We are playing a D note, and then which is above a C, and then we're playing a B note, which is below the C, and then we're playing the C. So we're playing above the note, then the below the note, and then we're playing the note. Let's hear that. Sounds fantastic. Right? It works really, really well. So you're taking the cool bebop-y ideas that you've got, and you're modifying where they end up slightly to make them fit the chord progression that you're working on. And this is kind of where I am currently with this material. Trying to take stuff like this and have it land somewhere that sounds nice. So like, let's take that idea. So I'm doing a triplet up the F minor 7 arpeggio. When I get down, walking down the scale, when I get down to the flat 7, I walk up a flat major 7 arpeggio. So we have a similar situation here where if I just walk down and replace the note where I might end up on this B flat, and replace that with a B, then it'll fit over the C major 7. And that'll sound fine. Let's see if we can land, instead of on the major 7, we'll land on the root, or maybe we can figure out how to land on the 3rd. So this is something that I like to do that I think sounds cool, and it's taking that enclosure idea again. And so instead of walking down from the D, D, C, B like we were doing, once we get to this D, once we get to the E flat, do an enclosure to get to the D, which fills up some space and delays our, not necessarily delays, it adjusts our resolution to where we can land on this C. That sounds okay. And this kind of thing it got nice bluesy sound to it. It's a really cool sort of bluesy sounding thing, and then it also helps us with this phrasing. So let's try that. So I totally messed up, but I fixed it. Walk up instead of down. Let's try that again. So now I'm ending up on the 3rd of the chord, the C, or the E. That's cool. So anyway, that's a stopping point for me. If you see in the book, some of this stuff is covered in the first few chapters, but then he gets into arpeggios, and then he gets into like surrounding notes, which is kind of what I'm getting to with these enclosures. But it's a ton more information, and I will get to it eventually. But my problem with instruction books, not the problem with the book, but my problem when I'm working with them is that I tend to work through them like I'm reading a book, like I'm reading a novel. Like I read what the information is, I play the exercise, I go, cool, I can play that, then I flip the page. Then I go, what's next? But most materials are not going to hold your hand in the way that I feel like they maybe should. What I would like is a presentation of the concept. And then when you flip the page, or whatever, you get tons of examples of how to use it. And kind of an open-ended, like here's some written down things, go try these, and then also take the time, like put it in the book. Now you go off and do this on your own. Go off and like challenge yourself to come up with and write out like 5 licks using this information before you flip the page. I would appreciate that. That's not the case in a lot of books that I look through. So I'm having to impose that on myself, and it's not hard to impose that on myself necessarily, but it's hard to remember that that's what I need to do. I'm so absorbed in the new material that I get to where I'm like, okay, I worked on all the half-step jumps in the scale. I did it in all 5 positions. I did it up to speed. This is great. That wasn't a waste of time, but there's a next step there that's not in the book. The book says, okay, cool, now we're on to arpeggios. But it never like tells you how or gives you the experience of using the information that you just practiced. Which kind of gets me to the main point, which is YouTube, I think, has been wonderful for so many reasons in giving people, both teachers, a place to teach, to reach large numbers of people with great information. It also gives the student just limitless, free, in a lot of cases, content, instructional stuff, which can be good because in some cases you need something explained in multiple different ways, or at least multiple different times before it really makes sense. So you can watch somebody explain the circle of fourths and go, I don't get it. Watch somebody else explain the circle of fourths and go, okay, I'm starting to get it, because it's sort of a combination of the two. And then watch it one more time and you're like, okay, I see that. I see how it all works out. And you'll find over time the people who can really present information that clicks with you. The people that really, like, I've had, thankfully, more people than not, but I have a good amount of people who say, you're the guy that I understand. Like, for whatever reason, all these other things that I've watched over time or read, like, it clicked when I watched your stuff. And I've had plenty of people who say, like, I don't get this. Like, you're not clicking with me. And that's fine. Like, everybody needs to try things with different people and all that kind of stuff. But you need to, when you learn something new, do this. I promise it will be beneficial to you. And this is me talking to myself as well as to you. When you learn something new, don't just click on the next video or buy the next book or flip the page without stopping, sitting down and working on that new thing. Like, really make sure you get it. Be creative with it. Use it in a song, whatever it happens to be. Really understand and practice that stuff and let it get absorbed into your playing before you start searching for the next thing. Because that's not going to help you. You're going to get halfway or maybe less through some idea before you jump to the next idea, and none of it's really ever going to connect. And then you'll be like, man, I spend a lot of time practicing, clicking through YouTube videos and playing along. Or in my case, like, okay, I played the exercise, I learned the idea, flipped the page, feeling like I'm doing all this great work, and at the end of the day, I still can't play anything. So you need to add that step. So whenever you've got material and some new material, stop and put a big step in the middle, which is the work part. You now understand and can play the idea, now work on it. And that's also where the fun happens, because now you're really playing. The work is actual playing. And work is fun, I guess, in this case. The work can be the fun part, and often is the fun part. If I'm just slogging through hours and hours of scale runs, it's not really fun for me. I might think that it's work, and it sort of is, but it's not fun. But if I can take that and put it into a practical context and really use my brain to think, how can I use this material? How can I be creative with it? Let me think about all the different ways I can use this stuff and mix and match the puzzle pieces and come up with all kinds of my own original stuff. It is both very, very valuable work, and it is also very, very fun. So keep that in mind as you're going through your musical journey. Don't forget the work step. You're not going to get people telling you, stop, go do that now. But you have to remember to do that. All right, so that is it for me this week. Thank you for watching, and I will see you all next time. Take care.